Amina Farouk was the obedient wife, Imran Qureshi the hard-working husband, and Tariq Qureshi the respected father-in-law. But behind closed doors, their names would become linked not by family, but by a forbidden affair, a hidden betrayal, and a night of blood that shocked an entire community. The courtroom was silent as Imran Qureshi stood before the judge, his eyes hollow, his expression unreadable. He had confessed without resistance, admitting to the murders in a voice so calm it unsettled the officers who had arrested him. From the night of the killings to the day of his sentencing, he showed no emotion, no tears, no anger, no remorse. It was as if whatever had once lived inside him had been extinguished the moment he ended the lives of his wife and father. The news of the double homicide spread rapidly through the Bradford community. People were stunned, confused, horrified. The Qureshi family had always been considered respectable, even admired. Tariq, though stern, had been seen as a man of honor. Amina, young and quiet, was thought to be the ideal daughter-in-law. The gruesome truth of what had happened inside their home shattered those illusions. As details of the affair emerged during the trial, shock turned into disbelief. The secret relationship between Amina and Tariq, the father-in-law and the daughter-in-law, was something no one could comprehend, let alone accept. The court proceedings revealed the depths of the betrayal. Forensic evidence confirmed that Amina and Tariq had been meeting regularly in the basement of the home, their relationship ongoing for months. The footage from the hidden camera was shown to the court under restricted viewing, its existence serving as undeniable proof of the affair. Imran's defense team presented this as the primary cause of his mental breakdown, arguing that the betrayal by both his wife and father drove him into a state of psychological despair. But the prosecution argued that Imran had ample time to make other choices. He could have left, reported the affair, or sought help. Instead, he chose violence. In the end, the judge sentenced Imran to life in prison with a minimum term of 28 years before eligibility for parole. The courtroom remained still as the verdict was read. There were no cheers, no sighs, just the finality of justice delivered for a tragedy that had no winners. Imran was led away in handcuffs, his face blank, his future sealed. After the trial, the Qureshi home was locked and eventually put up for sale. Neighbors avoided walking past it. Rumors spread about the haunting quiet that now hung over the property. Some said they saw lights flicker inside at night. Others claimed they heard sounds from the basement, even though no one lived there anymore. The house became a symbol of a hidden darkness that no one had seen coming. In the community, the case became more than just a crime. It became a cautionary tale. People whispered about the danger of secrets, the cost of silence, and the destruction that can come from betrayal masked by tradition. Though the physical evidence was stored and the case file closed, the emotional scars remained, deep and permanent. The story ended in death, but the questions it raised would linger much longer. Did love ever exist between Amina and Tariq, or was it manipulation from the start? Could anything have stopped Imran from snapping? Or was this tragedy set in motion the moment trust gave way to desire? The night the silence broke was cold and still. The kind of night where the streets emptied early and a layer of frost clung to the windows. Inside the Qureshi household, the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Imran had not spoken much in days. He moved mechanically, avoiding eye contact, going through the motions of daily life while something darker brewed within him. Amina and Tariq had no idea that he knew. They continued their secret routine, believing they were careful enough to avoid suspicion. But the truth was already in motion, and there was no stopping what would come next. Imran had made his decision. He had thought about going to the police, thought about walking away, even considered exposing them publicly to ruin their reputations. But none of those options brought him peace. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces, smiling, touching, whispering behind his back. The betrayal ran too deep. He had shared his life with these two people. He had respected his father. He had married Amina with trust. And now he felt like a stranger in his own home. On that night, Imran waited until the house fell into darkness. It was nearly midnight. Amina had gone to bed early, or so he thought. But then he noticed the faint creak of footsteps heading toward the basement, followed minutes later by a soft click, the door closing. His breathing slowed. He walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer, and pulled out the largest knife he could find. It felt cold and heavy in his hand. He stood still for a moment, listening. His mind was no longer racing. It was calm. Imran Qureshi was never the type to question things too deeply. He had been raised to accept that life was about responsibility, not emotion. Marriage, to him, was another duty, a role to fulfill rather than a bond to nurture. But even someone as emotionally reserved as Imran couldn't ignore the unsettling changes taking place in his own home. It began with small observations, each seemingly innocent but strange when considered together. Amina had become more secretive. She would often stay up late, claiming she couldn't sleep, and seemed irritated whenever he asked her simple questions. Her phone was always close to her, screen turned away, and she had begun locking it, something she had never done before. More curious, however, was his father's behavior. Tariq had started taking late showers and changing his clothes more than once a day, which was unusual for someone who had lived a regimented, predictable life for decades. He no longer spent time reading religious texts or watching news on television. Instead, he was often found in the kitchen, tidying up or engaging in activities that Imran had always handled himself. What puzzled Imran the most was the odd quietness that would fall over the house whenever he entered a room unexpectedly. Conversations would stop. Amina would quickly walk away. His father would change the subject or glance at his watch as if suddenly remembering something important. A gut feeling began to form, a quiet, gnawing suspicion that something was wrong. At first, he tried to brush it off, convincing himself that he was overthinking things due to stress at work. But the feeling grew stronger, and soon it became impossible to ignore. One evening, while Amina was upstairs and Tariq had stepped out for a walk, Imran decided to check the basement. Nothing in particular drove him there, but instinct guided his steps. What he found disturbed him: a blanket neatly folded on the old sofa, an empty teacup on the side table, and a faint scent of perfume that didn't belong to anyone but Amina. His chest tightened. He left without touching anything, but the image stayed with him. Determined to uncover the truth, Imran bought a small, motion-triggered camera online. He installed it discreetly in the living room, camouflaged behind a stack of books. Over the next week, he collected footage while pretending everything was normal. He went to work, came home, acted as if nothing had changed. But every night, he reviewed the recordings. On the fourth day, his worst fears were confirmed. He watched in stunned silence as the screen showed Amina and Tariq sitting unusually close, whispering, touching, embracing. Then, something unmistakable, an intimate gesture that left no room for doubt. Imran didn't cry. He didn't shout. Instead, he sat alone in his bedroom that night, staring at the printed screenshots in his hands. Rage burned quietly inside him, but so did humiliation. He felt betrayed not only by his wife, but by the man he had trusted most in the world. In that moment, something inside him shifted permanently. He couldn't see the house the same way anymore. It wasn't home. It was a lie wrapped in silence. And soon, he began to consider what to do with the truth he had uncovered. It started subtly, almost invisibly, as if the boundaries between propriety and danger blurred in the quiet corners of the Qureshi household. While Imran spent most of his days at the garage, working double shifts to help pay off a family loan, Amina and Tariq found themselves alone more often. What began as brief, polite exchanges slowly grew into prolonged moments of shared space, and glances held just a second too long. There was no single moment when the line was crossed. Instead, it was a series of silent understandings that neither of them tried to stop. Tariq, once seen as a distant and disciplined figure, began to change in small ways. He started wearing pressed clothes even on days he didn't leave the house. He lingered near the kitchen, where Amina spent most of her time. When she cooked, he would compliment the aroma or offer to help with something minor, peeling vegetables, lifting heavy pots, finding ingredients. Amina, initially shy and hesitant, began responding. It was not affection in the traditional sense, but a shared recognition of attention they were both missing from others. Amina, despite her young age, had felt invisible in her marriage. Imran was not cruel, but he was emotionally distant. Long work hours left little time for intimacy, and when he was home, he was often distracted, scrolling through his phone or falling asleep on the sofa. Conversations between them were shallow, functional, and void of warmth. In contrast, Tariq noticed her moods. He asked about her day. He listened. The very things a father-in-law should never become were exactly what she began craving. Soon, what had been occasional contact became routine. They developed unspoken schedules, quiet coffee breaks when Imran was gone, afternoon conversations in the living room, top shared chores that created reasons to be alone. Tariq began buying her small gifts, a scarf, a pair of earrings, pastries from the corner bakery. At first, Amina resisted accepting them, but with time, she stopped protesting. There was a thrill in it, something forbidden and electric that made her feel seen, even wanted. The physical boundary dissolved one night when the house was dark and silent. A touch on the hand became a longer hold. An innocent gesture lingered until it wasn't innocent anymore. The secrecy deepened. They started locking the door to the basement under the pretense of organizing old boxes. Amina began leaving her phone in her room to avoid suspicion. Tariq bought a prepaid phone, and they began messaging each other in code. Their affair became a tightly guarded secret, growing more reckless with each passing week. The danger of it didn't deter them. If anything, it made every stolen moment more intoxicating. They believed they were being careful, that Imran would never suspect. But in the shadows of their home, trust was being broken in the most devastating way. What they failed to see was that the deeper their secret grew, the more inevitable the destruction became. The Qureshi home, once seen as a place of respect and tradition, was now built on deceit, and it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. In a quiet corner of Bradford, England, where terraced houses stood shoulder to shoulder and neighbors knew one another by name, Amina Farouk began her new life as a married woman. At just 26, Amina was considered a respectable young woman, raised in a conservative Muslim household. She was soft-spoken, obedient, and rarely seen without a scarf covering her head. Her marriage to Imran Qureshi, a 29-year-old local mechanic, had been arranged by their families. It wasn't a love story, but in their culture, it didn't have to be. Compatibility, family ties, and tradition were considered more important than romantic connection. Their wedding was modest but well attended, with community members praising the union as blessed and ideal. After the wedding, Amina moved into the Qureshi family home. The house was old but well kept, with 3 bedrooms, a narrow staircase, and thick carpeting that silenced footsteps. Living in the same home was Imran's father, Tariq Qureshi, a 57-year-old widower who had raised Imran alone after the sudden death of his wife years earlier. Tariq was known in the local mosque as a devout man, a serious, private individual who carried himself with authority. He rarely smiled and spoke only when necessary, but people respected him for his discipline and traditional values. At first, Amina kept to herself. She helped with the cooking, cleaned the home diligently, and stayed mostly upstairs. Tariq would occasionally ask how she was adjusting, and Imran, when not working long hours at the garage, would try to offer comfort. But even in those early days, something in the house felt unspoken, like a weight in the air that no one wanted to acknowledge. Amina, despite her efforts, didn't seem happy. Her eyes were often downcast, and she smiled only when others were watching. Friends who visited during the first few weeks commented on how distant she seemed, but they attributed it to the stress of adjusting to married life. As the months passed, cracks began to show in the carefully constructed image of the household. Amina stopped attending weekend family dinners. She gave excuses for missing mosque events and gradually withdrew from her small circle of friends. When asked about married life, she gave vague responses or brushed the topic aside. Some suspected she was struggling with her in-laws or feeling isolated in a new environment. No one imagined that the problem was much more dangerous. Imran remained largely oblivious. His work consumed most of his time, and when he was home, he was often too tired to notice Amina's shifting behavior. Tariq, meanwhile, seemed to take more interest in Amina than expected. He began helping her with errands, asking her about her day, and staying longer in the kitchen when she was alone. His presence, once distant and stoic, became oddly attentive. There were no arguments, no fights, no outbursts. From the outside, everything looked ordinary. But behind the doors of the Qureshi home, something taboo was taking root. Something that would soon spiral out of control and leave 3 lives shattered beyond repair.